Just kidding. All right, hi everybody. Welcome to our very special webinar this Tuesday. We're going to go ahead and give it a couple minutes for folks to join us before we get started. So we'll get started around 2 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 2:02, something like that. We did have quite a few people register, so pretty excited about it. It's always like the awkward part of webinars is waiting for them to get started. All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Jessie Wales. I am one of 3 community engagement coordinators with the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program, and I am really excited to have Courtney Cortez from the Balmoral Group on with us today to give us an overview of the awesome economic valuation that they just completed for us on how much the lagoon is valued annually through all of the wonderful work we're doing and the folks that live in our watershed. So a couple of quick housekeeping for the webinar today is that this is a question and answer webinar. So if you do have any questions as Courtney is going through her presentation, please feel free to pop those into the Q&A section and we will make sure to answer them live after her presentation. If you have to hop off during this call, lose your connection to the internet, or want to go grab a pizza or something, don't worry, this webinar will be recorded and it is going to go up on our YouTube afterwards, so please feel free to share it widely within your network of colleagues. So without further ado, I will go ahead and let Courtney get started, and I look forward to hearing about the lagoon today.
Great, thank you. Hopefully you all are seeing my screen here. Do let me know if you're not. So good afternoon. I'm Courtney Cortez. I'm a senior economist with the Balmoral Group, and I'm really thrilled to be working with the Indian River Lagoon NEP team to bring you all this webinar to share the results of the Indian River Lagoon economic impact update and answer any potential questions that you all have. So this study was completed in a 2-phase approach. The first phase was initially the data collection as well as setting up the socioeconomic profile that then served and fed into phase 2 of the analysis, which was the economic impact update itself. So that involved looking at what the 2016 economic impact study results were, as well as how we could update that and include values such as cost benefit analysis of the NOAA funded projects. And so one of the things that we did different with the economic update was focus on the ecosystem services, and importantly, the lagoon system includes over 900,000 acres of natural lands and agricultural lands, retaining more than 100 billion gallons of floodwater annually. So this is an important point that I want to highlight, that if those floodwaters had nowhere else to go, it would go into homes, streets, buildings, and so forth. And so we thought that it was really important this time around to focus on some of those ecosystem services, including 50,000 acres of natural lands, providing additional coastal protection, and over 360,000 acres of land providing water filtration and purification ecosystem services. So these lands and waters contribute significant, substantial value to the local economy across the Indian River Lagoon region. So overall, our modeling found that the ecosystem services are generating over $10 billion annually. And I'll talk about a few of them today, but that does range from $6.8 billion in your recreational fishing, boating, and shoreline activities, 1.4 billion in the aesthetic values associated with property value premiums, and down to 250 million in coastal protection and so forth. And again, one of the key differences with the updated economic impact analysis was the inclusion of ecosystem services valuation. And the way that we look at these ecosystem services is by running models that estimate what would that protection have been or that ecosystem service had been had that habitat not been there. So we use the INVEST models, or the Integrated Valuation of Ecosystem Services tool, developed out of Stanford University. And that models how the changes in ecosystem structure and functions are affecting the flows and values of the services across that landscape. So we looked at 5 different models here for the Indian River Lagoon region, which I'll talk about a bit separately. So that's the coastal protection, water filtration and water quality, habitat quality, aesthetic or scenic value, as well as your recreational values and tourism as well. And so for an example here with the coastal protection, here on the right is the screenshot from the Tequesta area showing mangroves and oyster beds. And in this case, we're finding that habitats across the lagoon are reducing exposures to coastal hazards that you wouldn't have had if those natural processes were not intact. So in other words, if those lands were not preserved or conserved, that protection would not be there, to the tune of about $250 million annually across the lagoon system. So this does vary by those habitat types, looking at salt marsh here with $77.1 million in ecosystem services, maritime hammocks at 59.1 million, and so forth. I do want to go back for a second. So as you may be aware, there are currently the several NOAA-funded projects that are underway or completed now that we estimate are providing an additional 8.4 million in coastal protection services. So I'll talk a little bit more about the NOAA projects separately, but I'll highlight them here for the ecosystem services portion of this webinar. And looking at water filtration, this is similar. Mapped here shows the values ranging from $50,000 up to $4.5 million in different basins. Across the lagoon, that's another 360,000 acres of different habitats providing that water nutrient filtration. And so that is work that you would otherwise have to replace with infrastructure, such as your really expensive treatment plants and so forth. And so these are important ecosystem services to the tune of over $500 million annually. And those projects underway, or some of them completed in our cases, again, those NOAA-funded projects, are expected to add another $38 million in benefits. From a wildlife habitat perspective, the people of Florida have consistently stated a preference for strong preservation of environmental habitats for wildlife and habitat connectivity. We find that these habitats across the lagoon are generating over $1 billion annually in the public's willingness to pay. And that does range, pretty greatly across the lagoon, with $400,000 up to $90 million by those subbasins shown here on the right. And again, that does vary greatly by the habitat types that are identified through FEMA's ecosystems as well. So coastal wetlands contributing 164 million, inland wetlands 266 million, and so forth down to those rural green open space to $324 million. And then finally, on the property values, this is your cold hard cash values associated with the Indian River Lagoon. These still have really important values that are being generated by the aesthetic quality of the lagoon system. And so the way that we look at these is by looking at sales transactions from county property appraiser data, and then we hold constant to statistically tease out the value of those homes. If, for example, say the lagoon was paved over, basically what would that house be worth? So an example, a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house with a pool that's very close to the lagoon versus one that's further away, such as a mile out. And we can statistically tease out what that value would be. So what that proximity effect is of being close to the lagoon versus being further away. For Brevard County, for example, being within 100 meters of the lagoon adds about $350,000 in value over and above what that house would be worth otherwise. So holding constant, all other factors being equal. These values do vary greatly across the lagoon region. So in Palm Beach County, for example, that does jump to nearly $1 million for that proximity premium of the aesthetic qualities. And so across the lagoon region, we do end up with nearly $23 billion in property value premiums contributed by the lagoon system. That sounds like a lot of money, but the total just value is about $960 $62 billion. So in the whole scheme of things, it's a couple percent, but it is a really important couple percent. And when we look at this from an annual perspective, that is contributing $1.4 billion annually to the local economies. Existing ecosystem services are providing substantial values. However, they are diminished due to decades of urban and agricultural runoff and infrastructure that has altered the natural hydrologic processes of the lagoon region. So current restoration projects are intended to improve the function of those ecosystems across the lagoon and add substantial economic benefits. So I briefly touched on this earlier in the ecosystem services section, but we did look at these in terms of the context of the NOAA funded projects, specifically in the context of the lagoon's ecosystem services. So there were 15 projects across the lagoon that comprised the $9.4 million NOAA Transformational Habitat Grant, and we looked at a subset of those or case studies across 9 different habitat types. The project team worked with principal investigators and key persons involved with the projects to gather input for the cost-benefit analyses, as well as working with programs within the Indian River Lagoon region that are contributing to resource management, such as Save Our Indian River Lagoon and others. So they were really instrumental in providing identification of the various costs and benefits associated with each, as well as looking at what are the tracking units over time. And a few of you may be participating in this webinar today, and we do really greatly value and appreciate your time to speak with us and provide your input here. For the case studies, we did look across those different habitat types to select those case studies for cost benefit that represented something more of the middle of the road of a project, so not necessarily the highest or the lowest examples. And I do want to highlight here that even though these were selected for the habitats listed in this table, these projects also had measurable benefits from other restoration activities as well. And so those were accounted for in the benefit cost analysis. So again, we assessed the case studies across the habitat types from salt marsh to oyster reefs, wetlands, and so forth for all of the identified projects and how much we expect them to cost over a 10-year period in current dollars and what we expect their benefits to generate over that same period of time. This is conservative as the benefits exceed a 10-year period, but it's representative of a restoration project at maturity. So again, those benefits don't stop at year 10. They are, continuing on into time. But for this analysis, we did look at the 10-year time horizon. An example project here, just to highlight, a couple of them. The Salt Marsh project for Karen Bay is expected to have a total cost of about $380,000 over that 10-year period, but generate over $2.8 million in benefits. So there are also 2 really big projects here in terms of benefits, and those are mostly involving restoring flow to coastal wetlands by removing or altering impoundments. So those 2 projects are the Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge and the Bee Gum Point projects, and these have benefits of $55 million and $30 million respectively. So these are showing really huge numbers, and they are transformative projects that are significantly benefiting the fisheries, and that's providing a really hopeful message for the lagoon. In terms of how these tease out across the different projects, here we show the benefit cost ratios that represent how many benefits you receive per dollar of cost. Anything over 1 is good, meaning that the benefits are exceeding the cost. And all told, across the lagoon system, you end up with a return of 24x, or $24 in benefits for every $1 in cost. The 2 large projects that I just mentioned have really high benefit cost ratios, but even without those, lagoon-wide, we would have an average of about 10. So really good expenditure of public funds here. As part of the benefit cost analysis, we do complete a sensitivity analysis to test our assumptions. These are sensitive, benefit cost ratios are sensitive to the values used as inputs for calculations, discount rates, and time horizons. And through that, we look at how these projects would shake out if those benefits were significantly lower or the time horizon changed or so forth. So nearly all of them still passed benefit costs with their benefit cost ratios exceeding 1 with the exception of 1 project. Again, that 1 project on here with a seemingly low BCR comparatively, again, this is over 1 in the base case here. So look, those benefits are exceeding the cost. But I do want to emphasize that the costs for that project specifically were shared with another project. And this could, in this instance, be overstating that share a little bit, which might understate the BCR here. So this was the only project that had the instance of that benefit cost ratio being below that one threshold when we completed the sensitivity analysis. And then lastly, I'm going to touch on the traditional economic impact results and also look at the review of the dashboard tool. To estimate the overall economic impacts associated with the Indian River Lagoon region, we used IMPLAN. This is an econometric modeling application that generates regional economic impact multipliers. So this is an input-output model that estimates the flow of supply and demand between and within counties and by industry sector. So this converts those estimates of those cash flows to economic impacts measured through jobs, revenues, and personal income. So this accounts for the region's direct spending, and then it margins out what isn't produced locally, such as an example of this is when you purchase gas, right? We don't make refined petroleum products here, so a lot of that spending leaves the area. Direct spending then creates indirect jobs and indirect business expenditures, as well as your induced impacts. But those induced effects are primarily driven by the spending from visitors. And then I do want to point out that the value added is measuring the industry capacities to translate a change into income and final demand. And what this essentially means is what are your results or your impacts to your local GDP. When we look at the lagoon overall, we end up with about $28 billion in total output. That's contributing $14 billion to your local GDP, including $1.4 billion in annualized property value premiums. This does support 128,000 jobs across the lagoon. And so again, really significant impacts here. Looking at that across the sectors, we do see how this teases out across everything from resource management, recreational spending generated in aerospace sectors that depend on those wide open spaces without development. So one point I want to highlight here is that the importance of, while it's not the largest share of employment, natural resource management and your restoration activities are creating local jobs more intensively. So we were able to attribute 450 direct jobs that are creating an additional 600 jobs in natural resource management. So again, this is also adding more than $1 in local GDP for every $1 funded in your natural resource management activities. This is because things like mangrove seedlings are grown locally, and the people that are actually doing the restoration work itself are also local. Comparatively, recreation, for example, while it is the largest share of your economic impacts, every $1 in direct spending is generating about 60 cents in value added to the local GDP. This is because there are leakage effects where those goods that are purchased for recreation expenditures, for example, are less likely to be locally produced. And I do want to highlight here for, while it's a bitter reality, the commercial fishing has markedly declined over the last couple decades, with your lagoon-specific landings, such as oysters and clams, collapsing. Thus, the numbers here are notably low. In the most recent year of completed data, the selected species represented 17% of the total landings across the Indian River Lagoon region. The value here is considered to be conservative, as the analysis included only those species that are landed in the lagoon, as opposed to potentially overstating or double counting the value associated with your commercial landings for species that are typically caught offshore but may rely on the lagoon for nursery habitat. So we do acknowledge that while it is estimated that about 75% of all commercially landed saltwater fish spend part of their lives in the Indian River Lagoon, we did not want to, overstate, and we did take a conservative approach for estimating those commercial fish landings that are occurring in the lagoon itself. And the IRL-driven economic activity is generating substantial tax revenue impacts. There's a total of $3.4 billion in tax revenues, with about $1.7 billion to local and state areas, as well as $2.4 billion to federal. And then lastly, a dashboard tool was created to share this information with the public. And that, there's a link here at the bottom. I do believe, the NEP also has it on their website. This does allow users to filter by whatever, need they want to look at, such as city and county or priority communities and across time. There is 2012 through 2022 for most of the socioeconomic data, and 2025 for your economic impact effects. And with that, I will go ahead and open it up for Q&A.
There we go. Excellent. Thank you so much. That was a fantastic presentation. Yes, so just a quick reminder that the chat function is disabled. If you have any questions, please ask them through the Q&A box, which is showing up over on the right-hand side for me. So we do have a couple of questions coming in on the question and answer section. First one is there somewhere that we can find out about each of these projects? I think that is an answer more for us. What do you think, Courtney, or for...
Well, the report is on your website.
Mhm.
So there's a section for each of those projects that are outlined. So absolutely, you could go to the NEP's website and access those results for each of those case studies.
Excellent. And if you're interested in the background of each one of the projects, we do have a story map up on our website as well, about each one of the NOAA projects too. So onelagoon.org is going to be your source for everything. Is this model something that could be applied fairly easily to other estuaries?
Yes. So this was designed in some ways for replicability and applicability to other estuaries. We have completed a similar study for the Coastal and Heartland National Estuary Partnership. I believe that was completed in 2022. And there were, some transferable aspects between the studies. But in short, yes, it is designed and could be transferred to other areas as well.
Awesome. So when people hear $28.3 billion annually, what does that number actually represent, and how can the average citizen interpret that number?
Sure. So that number represents all of the industry activities associated with the lagoon. So your commercial fishing, your boat sales, your recreational activities, whether, somebody that's jet skiing on the lagoon and somebody that's using the lagoon in a shoreline capacity, as well as your property value premiums associated with that. But that includes your direct effects, which are those direct dollars spent that within that local economy, as well as your indirect and your induced effects, so the business to business transactions, and then the household spending effects as well. So that's the bigger number. There are, some portions of that kind of leaves the area, so the leakage effects, if you will. And the number that we like to look at or communicate is the value added to your local economies, and that's that $14 billion number.
Awesome. Thank you so much. What are some economic drivers that you didn't consider, such as agriculture, O2, CO2, excuse me, carbon dioxide, and why didn't you consider those?
That's an excellent question. They weren't highlighted separately as they're likely to be captured through other means. So when we look at those ecosystem services there's a lot of several of those numbers come from FEMA directly, and they do include things like your carbon capture and those effects. Those are in the underlying dollar values associated with willingness to pay for that type of ecosystem service. So it is being captured, it just isn't being called out separately and specifically.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. In 2016, the economic value of the Indian River Lagoon was estimated at $7.6 billion annually. Your research has it at over $28 billion. Why the difference?
Difference in approach largely. So the
Difference in
previous
approach?
study, yes, there's a difference in the approach. So again, we
Mhm.
did look at the 2016 approach, which primarily looked at just the economic impact side of that, as well as, but this approach does look at the ecosystem services side as well and the inclusion of that. And these economies are, bigger. 2016 is a much different picture for these economies as well, compared to 2022. Post-pandemic effects, we saw a lot
Right.
of visitor changes and resident changes as well. So just a different economic picture as well as approach.
Excellent. Thank you. How easy is it to keep the dashboard updated for the socioeconomic data?
Relatively easy. So the socioeconomic data is primarily from census data. We have already updated it one time. So again, really easy. Is not as heavy uplift for a socioeconomic profile in terms of updating it annually. We completed it in the first phase and then we updated it in the second phase.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. Was there any habitat or project with benefits that surprised you, perhaps an outsized economic benefit that your team didn't expect?
That's a great question. Yes, I do think those two, particularly those two wetland impoundment projects, were just so massive in size. We do know that talking with the PIs there, some of the cost savings and the methods used were really generating substantial benefits there. Those benefits do exceed beyond the project scope as well. So when we did look at this, we're not, those benefits aren't being refined to just the project footprint. We are recognizing that it is expansive and beyond that. Fish don't stay in that one area, for example, it does extend beyond. But those two projects specifically, we do know that, talking with the PI there for Minware, right, they had some technology improvements that resulted in some substantial cost savings in that case.
Fantastic, thank you. Is this modeling of CBRs and value added amendable to value and risk, VAR, due to specific scenarios, private space expansion and Merritt Island?
Can you repeat that?
Yes, that's a tough one. I'm actually going to go ahead and throw that in the chat for you while I repeat it, just so you can read it out loud. I want to make sure I'm getting it right. Is this modeling of CBRs and value added amenable to value at risk, VAR, due to specific scenarios, such as private space expansion and Merritt Island?
I want to say yes. Um,
What are CBRs? Can you define that for us?
Cost benefit ratios.
Thank you. Okay, so
Yes, so that's
is
the,
this modeling of cost benefit ratios and value added amenable to value at risk due to specific scenarios, such
yes,
as private space expansion merit? That's how I'm
right.
understanding the question.
Right,
Yeah.
yes. So yes, we do recognize that the aerospace industry, for just using that for an example here,
Sure.
needs the undeveloped space. So in some ways, the habitat protection that's happening there. And if that wasn't there, and that's part of the reason why the aerospace program was able to be as successful in this region as it is because it was, historically undeveloped, wide open spaces that they could do that. And so, yes, there is, it is amenable to that specific scenario of private space expansion, but also, development expansion as well. And, there is a great need to retaining that habitat for those industries. So there are some, trade-offs occurring there in that case.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Can you please explain what the invest model is, and if a municipality was interested in exploring this resource, what should we know?
Sure. So the INVEST is the Integrated Valuation of Ecosystem Services tool developed out of Stanford University. This is a tool that it was designed to be applicable across regions, and so you could compare it, right? It's really great in that we've used Invest, for example, over in the Tampa Bay region and looking at effects there. And we've applied, similar methodologies with the Invest tool in the Indian River Lagoon system as well. So
Cool.
it's really great at talking in terms of communicating the results of ecosystem services on more of a global scale because they do have like a global model that they can use. Municipalities can take advantage of that tool. It is publicly available for use, and there are some data sets built within it that provide for modeling using those global data sets, if you will. The users are able to modify that to be more specific to their area. So if you do know, for example, what the changes in your nutrient delivery ratios are, for example, you could update that within the model to be more representative of your actual region instead of
Got
using
it.
the global data.
That's really cool. That's a cool tool.
It's fantastic.
What lessons can communities and funders take from these case studies when prioritizing future restoration investments?
Can you repeat that?
Yes. So what lessons can communities and funders take from these case studies when prioritizing future investments? Like lessons learned, I guess.
Sure. I think one of the biggest lessons learned here is that restoration is it's across your one thing I've noticed in talking and what we've noticed in talking with the PIs and being a part of the NOAA calls quarterly as well is how communication is really important and
Mhm.
making sure that these projects and working together, right, and making sure that these projects are somebody may be struggling in one area, they're able to communicate that and share that knowledge with somebody else, and that they're able to advance their projects. There's also, resource sharing that we've seen occurring here too that creates some of those cost savings. So I did highlight on, some of those projects had similar pools or the same pool and split across their project areas, and that may be creating, again, some of those cost savings benefits for those projects specifically.
Awesome, thanks. Were there any ecosystem benefits that are important but difficult or impossible to quantify economically?
Yes, there are a few. There's at least one that comes to mind in terms of trying to remember the exact name of that model. I think it was the nutrient or sediment delivery ratio models for the ecosystem services. So we do know there's some more advanced models out there, for example, from the water management districts and those specific the Invest tool, for example, might have produced a result that would vary from what the water management districts might have been showing or what other resource managers might be showing. And so in that case, for example, we looked at those results slightly differently because we didn't want to contradict anything that, not saying that the results did contradict. I'm just saying that we paused it. We
Yeah,
didn't move
absolutely.
forward with that.
Yeah, yeah,
We
yeah.
looked at what the water management districts and others with more advanced stormwater modeling, for example, in those areas, because it does exist, right? We don't want to basically reinvent the wheel there,
Yeah.
right? So that's an example of one of those types of models.
Awesome. Thank you. And then final question of the day, it should be a fun one, should be an easy one. If attendees remember just one takeaway from this report, what do you hope it is?
I hope the takeaway is that there is hope for the Indian River Lagoon region, that there's a lot of really great work being done for restoration activities that are driving such a huge driver of the economy here across eastern central Florida, and that it's possible that people can work together to really make substantial change, and that it is happening, even if in the past it appears to have been a bit slower paced than what
Yeah.
one might have hoped for.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Courtney. We really appreciate it. This was a fantastic overview of the work that you guys have done. And just a quick reminder for all the folks online, this entire report is available on our website at One Lagoon, or you can read the executive summary. We also have hard copies of the executive summary. So if you'd like us to either mail them to you or bring them to wherever you work, we would be more than happy to do that as well. And with that, just a quick reminder too that this webinar has been recorded, will be available on YouTube, so please feel free to share it widely. And I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. Thanks for joining us, Courtney. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.